Hello everyone, this is Doug Curry from Spirit and Truth Ministries videos, and as I know I haven't made videos for a while, but I'm trying to get back to making them more regularly again. But as I'm sure most of you know, there's a lot going on in the world, currently and recently, and most likely, in the near future. One of those areas in the Middle East. And, well, I'll just read it at the beginning here, and maybe you can go into it more, in this message, because there's other verses in the Bible, but this is, I believe, one of the key ones. It's talking about the Antichrist. It's, probably a main one, especially the false Middle East peace and that. And I'll just read a bit of the previous verse, Daniel chapter 9, just a bit of verse 26 and verse 27, because 26 is partly referring back to the verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, and not for himself. That's, when Jesus died on the cross, is in Hebrew to be cut off, meant to be, to die young or violently or both, and both of them did happen with Jesus when he was crucified at an apparent age of about 33 years or so. But next part is what, maybe want to key in on this part this time. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. That's, I believe, and most, Bible teachers interpret that as the people of the prince, the people being the Romans, and the prince being the Roman general, as Titus, that shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. This was written by, the Jewish prophet Daniel. And so to him, the city, the most important city, was Jerusalem, and the sanctuary was, we believe is the Jewish temple in Jesus' time, which was Herod's temple, or the Jews call it the Second Temple. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and all that happened in 70 A.D. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Yeah, well, there's different interpretations what that last part will be, but we think that's the time, the last 2,000 years mostly. And desolations means places come to ruins or something, and which is with wars and natural disasters and things. Which has certainly happened over the last 2,000 years in different places. Anyway, then to get to verse 27, and shall confirm the covenant, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And he, just in basic grammar, is a pronoun, and a pronoun refers to the previous noun, especially the similar type. And he is singular, and so we have to look back at maybe in a person or whatever. So we have to look back at the last noun as a person or whatever. And I think it's probably, I maybe haven't checked it exactly, but I'm just looking at it, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. The people of the prince that shall come. Prince is a singular, and it is a noun. But in that case, it was the Roman general Titus, and after that, in the next decade or so, he did become Roman emperor as well. In 79 AD, I think. Anyway, that's what he in verse 27 is compared to, as to a Roman general, maybe Roman emperor. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. So that's he, we think, is the Antichrist, or in the New Testament, the beast, or the man of sin, etc. Or elsewhere in Daniel, the little horn. and we think this is like a Middle East peace. This is why I'm sharing this. You know, and like a false Middle East peace by the devil, you know, organized through his world dictator, the Antichrist, in the 7-year tribulation. And 1 week here is not 1 week of 7 days, but we believe 1 week of 7 years. Historically, it touched with 70 weeks here, and it does fit to you know, what the other things we're talking about earlier in these preceding verses, as you know, as 70 times 7 years, or 490 years. So yes, for many for 1 week, so that's 1 week of 7 years, and that ties in with Revelation and in the New Testament. And in the midst of the week, you shall in the midst of the 7-year, what, you know, they call it sabbatical year, because that's the Jews did use that, you know, to every 7th year to let the land alone or let it fallow so it could replenish itself. You know, it's mentioned in Genesis or Leviticus. But the Jews ignored that for a long time. That's why God, we think, put this judgment to make up for that. You know, the number of years the Jews neglected it. And in the midst of the week, ye shall cause the sacrifice and oblation, and the oblation to cease. We think this is part of the covenant that this is being talked about at the beginning of this verse. And the Middle East peace, or the false Middle East peace, that, you know, evangelical Christians, you know, that have been interested in Bible prophecy and relating it to current events, sort of make a big deal of. And you know, because we think, you know, this is one prophecy. There are some others, you know, including the New Testament, that talks about a tribulation temple. And we think that's the same. This is where it gets into things more, you know, current things. Like the Jews are very active right now, you know, more active, you know, and zealous. You know, it's just as zealous, maybe more so than, you know, in 1967, the 6-Day War, when they had full control of the Temple Mount for a while after they won the war against the, you know, Arabs that were threatening to come in from all directions and wipe the Jews into the sea, as sometimes they said they wanted to do. You know, but anyway, the Jews are, you know, quite zealous, and there's a lot of Messianic fervor, because I look regularly at some Jewish, or, you know, Israeli Jewish websites like Jerusalem Post, or Israel National News, or Israel 365 News, or I'm looking also, I just started looking at it recently, Israel Hayom, that are about the same perspective, I think. And they're all, you know, giving indications or stating about the, you know, Messianic fervor in a Jewish sense, like thinking they're getting close to building establishing the, you know, Messianic kingdom, and thinking that Messiah, you know, mentioned the Bible, is going to come soon. You know, I think he's going to come fairly soon too, but I think there'll be the 7-year tribulation that raptures the church before that, before the millennial kingdom. But they don't think that. They think that we're going to start the millennial kingdom right away very soon. Anyway, and so this is talking about including to have a temple with animal sacrifices and Levitical priests and all that, which, you know, they've got most of that priesthood already restored and trained for doing the sacrifices already, especially with the Temple Institute. You know, well, that's another story, but he was started by Rabbi Israel Ariel, and who's still leading it. He's still very much alive. And but he started in '87, and he, you know, was one of the 5 men through the paratroopers in 1967 who liberated the Temple Mount for Israel. And from Jordan, because it wasn't a Palestinian state in 1967, it was controlled by surrounding Arab countries, or what's considered the Palestinian state areas now. Anyway, In the midst of the week he shall cause a sacrifice and oblation to cease. Well, what's going on is about the covenant. A covenant can be a treaty or a pact or something like that, which, as in a Middle East peace treaty or something, within the bounds of how covenant is used in the Bible. And but we think one of the elements, it says many with many, and we think it's many nations. There are some other interpretations, like just many people or something. But I think I believe it's many nations, and that's quite often how it's interpreted by the literal Bible teachers. And in the midst of the week he shall cause a sacrifice and oblation to cease. So we think that's one of the main aspects of that piece, is you can't make something to cease unless it started. And so, in that case, like, animal sacrifices and oblation would be, it's called that way in the Old Testament sometimes. They had a wine offering or drink offering, and they poured that on the animal sacrifices sometimes. Well, usually that was part of the, what it was, instructed of the Levitical priesthood to do in the book of Leviticus. And, and it also had a grain offering, which is called oblation something. Or, but it says in the midst of the week, so we think that's halfway through the week, or 3.5 years, and that's where it really matches up with Revelation, because they have a number of times, and right at the key point where the Antichrist takes full control of the world, that are called 3.5 years, but usually, in terms of other ways, like on days or months or something, like 42 months or 1260 days or something. But it works out both times to 3.5 years. And it says, then it goes on and says then it gets on to the second half of the tribulation, and talking about the Antichrist, when that's what he really wants to agree with the Jews to build his temple. So the devil, and also in other things, he values things of God more than just straight, pagan or secular things, because he can feel he has more satisfaction or something about, corrupting them or defiling them or whatever, as giving a spite to God and things, or to God's people, or some, Christians or Jews or someone. And, anyway, it says, so he'll probably go in the Holy of Holies of this, Jewish temple that's going to be rebuilt on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem. Yes, by world's, way of speaking, it is in East Jerusalem, and that's one reason the Jews are probably, really, even some of the secular Jews, especially in Israel, let alone the Orthodox Jews, really don't want to, accept the two-state solution, because it includes all of the old city of Jerusalem, including all of the Temple Mount and Western Wall. So all the area Jordan had between 48 and 67 to the Arabs, or the Palestinian Arabs in this case. And not for the Jews at all. And they might not be able to access even the Western Wall, certainly not the Temple Mount if it was in the Arab hands, as was the case when it was under Jordan in 48 to 67. I think there was a barbed wire over a wall between East and West Jerusalem then, and Jews could only look at the Western Wall of the Temple Mount. But then they're concerned that could happen again if Florida's two-state solution that takes effect or whatever, because that's probably what Muslims or even some liberals would want. And if the overspreading of abominations, that means that probably the Antichrist going in the Holy of Holies of this temple, and that would be abomination to God. He shall make it a desolate, or the temple and the Holy of Holies of it, because it probably will have a Holy of Holies, because the Jews will probably want it built like they'll be thinking this should be the one for the Millennial Kingdom or Messianic Kingdom, and it should be similar to the Solomon's or Herod's temple. They did have Holy of Holies. Even unto the consummation, we think the consummation means, wrapping up or concluding and, ending thing, but bringing all things together, sort of. Yeah, even in the consummation, we think that would be the end of history, and as we know it under the nations, when with Jesus' second coming, he sets up his visible kingdom over all the earth, like is mentioned abundantly in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. And that determined, the consummation shall be poured upon the desolate, and the desolate can mean a desolator, or one that makes it desolate, or the Holy of Holies, or the tribulation temple, and that's the Antichrist. Anyway, that's the background, but I guess it's quite a bit time come in already or whatever, but I just wrap up what I've mentioned a little bit, but the Jews are getting more zealous and making more progress or whatever, and getting more Jewish rights in the Temple Mount on an ongoing basis, and of course it is Orthodox Jews or some Jewish people, especially in Israel, that are most zealous about building the temple again, that are going up to the Temple Mount and doing these things, and and I do agree with it generally, but of course I believe the only sacrifice I'm a Christian, not rabbinic Jew or something, but and I'm Gentile, I don't have any Jewish blood, but although I wouldn't be against it if I did, but because I'm just British background originally, and but the Jews are getting more. They're certainly pushing this through, including with the government, with Benjamin Netanyahu, and especially some of the other parties in his coalition, and even some other people in his own Likud party that are more zealous than him about it, and some are very zealous. But there are some other parties in this coalition that are quite zealous about building the temple, including this, Yehuda Asma or something like that party, but it means Jewish power, and that's the one that they are religious Zionists, and there's another sort of religious Zionist. They're both relatively small parties, led by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, and they do both want to build a temple, and a Jewish temple there, and I do agree with that, but I'd have to take more time to explain, and even though I think it'll put forward Bible prophecy, and it'll be the sooner that the rapture of the church happens before that, and the second coming with the church coming down to heaven to rule with Jesus. The end of the tribulation will be, so and then the eternity before that, after that, and so we as Christians, we do have looking forward to God, including Jesus, being glorified more on earth, and so and of course maybe more selfishly too, that we'll share in His glory and not have to suffer for Him anymore, like in this life or mortal life or whatever. But that's another story. And anyway, so the Jews are getting more rights, or they do have some people in the government and some people coordinating with the police on the Temple Mount, or for the Jewish part anyway. And a lot of the opposition before for this type of thing, more Jewish rights in the Temple Mount, was by Hamas, but certainly the ones in the Gaza Strip, and maybe some of them came in from Israel or Jerusalem. I don't know all the details. I haven't had to look into that more myself yet. But anyway, Israel's killed at least 17 to 20,000 Hamas operatives, including some of the top leaders in Gaza anyway. And the Gaza war since October 2023, and with the targeted killings and whatnot. And this has certainly led to less opposition of Muslims, including Arab Muslims, or in the Holy Land, Palestinian Arab Muslims, whatever you say, or within Arabs within Israel itself, and 2 Jews going up to the Temple Mount, so they're able to, just keep pushing more and eventually get away with more. I do agree with that, but you know, but I think, well, certainly the situation in Gaza, I think Israel does has to be more careful, but but I think they are being quite careful in a lot of respects there. We're against respect to civilians, but there are human shields by Hamas and all that. But that's again another story. Um, Organized by Hamas, but the Jews are getting more rights to pray, and exercising it to out loud. Well, they've been doing that for a while, but they're also more, prostrating themselves, like going, down under the whole, front or whatever, and especially, bowing, praying towards the Dome of the Rock, where most of the Jews think that the Jewish temples before Herod's and Solomon's temple were, and where they should build the new Jewish temple. And there's videos of that available from the Temple Institute, or this guerrilla group Be'adenu is Returning the Mount, which are Jewish Temple Mount activists also in Israel. And I have seen some of those things, and there's also, like, they just had the 9th of Av today or whatever, which is the day of the year when the Jews believed that both the first and second temples were destroyed, and because it became a cursed day when 10 of the 12 spies that went in from Canaan in the time of Moses said that they couldn't take the promised land or whatever, and God's, including Moses, viewed it as not having faith, and so it's sort of the Jews, since then, or well, certainly since the first and second temple was destroyed, should think that the curse that day of the year, it was the same day of the year in the Jewish calendar anyway, and there seems to be that they say, I think it's true that other things happened more recently on that same day that were cursed in a way, was the main thing in the Inquisition, Spanish Inquisition against Jews, and in the Nazi Holocaust by Hitler and the Nazis and that. But there is a scripture in Zechariah 8 that says it become a day of blessing in the Messianic millennial kingdom, including the 9th of Av, which was Av was the 5th month, and anyway, the Jews are also, today they were some unfurling Israeli flags in the Temple Mount quite openly, which before there weren't this status quo agreement of the international law, what they were not supposed to do. They're only allowed to visit and all that. The Muslims are supposed to be allowed to go up there and worship Allah and all that sort of thing, and bow to him, and pray out loud and all that sort of thing. And it was agreed upon in 1967 to as a goodwill gesture by the Israeli leadership to the Arabs then. But anyway, the Jews have been sort of like tired of that, especially and want to claim more Jewish rights, especially considering it's in Israel, and part of they view it as part of the integral part of the Jewish state, all of Jerusalem, especially the more historic part, which it is. Israel is the holiest site in the world, or the Jewish one. It is Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount, and because the temples were there, and that was where they believe they come before the Lord. And I believe that's true, and like especially in the Old Testament, maybe God's presence wasn't there quite as much with the Herod's temple, but it certainly was in Solomon's temple, and the Holy of Holies, and above the Ark of the Covenant, mercy seat, and and then the Jews are also singing out. They just got a permission to sing out loud and dance, which they're doing at the 9th of Av on the Temple Mount, doing a circular horror dance, and there is other things too, and but those are some of the main things. But there are certainly getting gradually more Jews going up there too on the Temple Mount, and having, marriages and bar and bat mitzvahs and stuff like that too. Um, but anyway, you know, this is all contrary to what sort of general world community and the United Nations and all that, and the two-state solution says, which is, that they, have a Israeli and Palestinian state dividing up the Holy Land, but, and giving West Jerusalem to the Jews. But the problem is, especially with I think as Jews of Israel would see it, that West Jerusalem is only the modern part of Jerusalem, or relatively modern, but the East Jerusalem includes, but there's other parts of East Jerusalem besides that, but East Jerusalem includes all the, old city that was in Jesus' time or before that, and the part with those walls around it, and and um, including the Jewish border in the old city, everything, and the Temple Mount and the Western Wall, all that's part of East Jerusalem. As a if you look on the maps, you can, it's readily, available on the internet, or even some books, even a library or something. And and Israel wouldn't get any of that end of the two-state solution unless they had some, horse trading or something, for a different territory. But I don't, but Hamas has Dome of the Rock even in their insignia, and that was, and it was in walls of a lot of Muslim houses, including one from the Gaza Strip, and this is, reinforced to even some secular Jews who were in the, Israeli army and saw that firsthand, and, Muslim houses in the Gaza Strip when they were in there still seeing it, and that the Jews should, equally value the Temple Mount and to build a, Jewish temple there and all that. This is still happening, but they just had more, because of what's happening in Gaza Strip, or what's perceived. Hamas is also, there have been some, killing of civilians by Israelis, but a lot of it have been, also Hamas, setting up around food stations and, invading Israel. I don't know all the details, but they don't care if some of their own people, that are Palestinian Arabs, or Hamas doesn't care that much, as long as it gets worse, media coverage for Israel and everything. And they know that quite a bit of the mass media in the West is, by liberals, and not that supportive to it, especially like anything like a Orthodox Jewish state in Israel that sort of, is the focus of some Netanyahu's coalition. And so more countries are recognizing a Palestinian state, including major European countries, especially. They just had this meeting, last month, or I guess the beginning of this month in August 2025, organized by France and Saudi Arabia, and where France pretty well declared, recognizing Palestinian state by France, or Emmanuel Macron did. Who, by the way, well, we'll see. I think he could be. I could go into that a lot more. A good candidate for the Antichrist, but I guess we'll have to see. I don't know for sure, but I could go on a lot of other things about him, but that I do have evidence for, read in the internet, and some secular and some Christian or other, websites or books and things. And it's not a bad thing, maybe that way, that his first name is Emmanuel, but that's, we'll see if that means anything. Which of course was the name for Jesus in Gospel of Matthew. But the world community is sort of like getting impatient, including other major Western nations, and they're getting sort of fueling all these pro-Palestinian demonstrations around the world, including in Western countries. And some of it I heard is they're even coming in, in Britain maybe, or other places in Europe maybe more. These so-called pro-Palestinian, and some of it might be actually more masking Islamic Jihad, and the name of pro-Palestinian rights and stuff. But anyway, they are disrupting Western culture. There's no doubt about that. but some of them are even coming and, barging in on church services, live active church services. And this is, not, this is lawless or, anarchist, or, certainly not respecting human rights of Christians, including in Western countries, but it's already happened to some degree, and, threatens to happen more. And, but, and, it is, they do have Western liberals or white liberals or, well, maybe some other visible minorities as well as, from majority Muslim countries, supporting this pro-Palestinian thing, and because of the thing in Gaza. But I heard like that one boy that was, supposed to be quite hungry. Well, he was quite. I guess the latest thing I heard, like from Jerusalem Post and places like that, is he actually had pre-existing genetic conditions before 2023, but they're not mentioning that in the media or by Hamas and the Gaza Health Ministry, which is part of the Hamas government. But the media is just sort of says, taking everything with gospel truth from them, which, isn't accurate. Anyway, but it's a lot of people are listening to all that in the mass media and getting all hyped up against Israel, and and maybe more digging in about insisting on the two-state solution, and that Canada, like I live in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, near Toronto, and hear some of the local or national news here, and about Mark Carney, our Prime Minister, new Prime Minister, the Liberal Party of Canada. He's sort of, he and his party are certainly, politically or ideologically liberal or whatever, and, along with France, and, seems Britain is getting close to doing that too, to recognizing a Palestinian state, and, they're saying that they're going to make it official at the General Assembly meeting, and, with the United Nations in New York City, and next month in September, and probably with other countries. And apparently, I wasn't quite aware it was that much, but more than 100 countries have, not mostly in the non-aligned or what you used to call the third world, in Africa and Asia and Latin America or something, parts of Latin America, have already recognized the Palestinian state. But it's a major, and I guess there's pressure now, and on Germany and Italy too, and places like that. I think Portugal is just about to, Spain's already done that, to recognize a Palestinian state. So I think this is leading to the false speech of the Antichrist a lot sooner than that. So they're getting a collision course with zealous Messianic type Jews in Israel. There may be some other parts of the world too. And and they're also being driven more, Jews from not just Europe, but such as from France or England, because of making it almost intolerable for them to live openly as Jews or whatever, because of the pro-Palestinian protesters, whether they're Muslim or Western liberal or whatever they are, or some of them are socialists or Marxists. And there's still some right-wing, anti-Semites too, I don't deny that. And then that's a problem too. But there's probably a bigger problem with left-wing, anti-Semites now. And, it's getting worse in North America too. And they've had some incidents I've heard of in Toronto, or even the odd one right here in Hamilton. There are some Jewish synagogues in Hamilton too, and cemeteries. At least some of the synagogues things have happened sometimes, but but more in Toronto, because a lot more Jewish people, and buildings with synagogues and things like that there. Some of those people in the United States, some of those people now are going to move permanently or make Aliyah. That means to go up. That's the term the Jews make it, to Israel permanently. And they're more likely, frankly, to become more zealous Jews for that, Zionist, but it's actually a good term in the Bible, but it's become derogatory for people that don't want a Jewish state, much less probably the Messianic or millennial kingdom, with Jesus reigning over all the earth from Jerusalem, with restored Israel and the saved the nation and the true church. Anyway, I think this is all these. I think it's coming to a head, and in the Antichrist will sort of maybe pull a rabbit out of the hat and get a Middle East peace very soon. Including if this, if all these things that are threatened to happen in the General Assembly this year, and make it a main issue, which is looking like it might be, to recognize a Palestinian state, do happen, and those and maybe other countries, especially Germany, does too, and recognize a Palestinian state, which is still the most important country in Europe. Then it's sort of like Israel in sort of the United States or whatever, but the Democrats in the United States would rarely probably support a Palestinian state too, especially at this time. But we're not in power right now, and so anyway, I think this is I encourage you to trust in Jesus Christ, that He died for us on the cross and rose again the third day. That's also the condition to be raptured or caught up to heaven before in 1 Thessalonians 4, in the New Testament, before, and in John 14, with Jesus' own words, verse 1, you believe in God, believe also in me, and my Father's house are many mansions, and so on. We think this also about the rapture. It's not talking about Him coming right down to the earth, like, about the second coming is. And anyway, to trust in Jesus, so you're going to be not only have eternal life and not go to hell like we all deserve for our sins. For God, is, even the New Testament, is righteous and just and holy and everything, besides loving, gracious, and merciful. That that if we have none of us can meet that standard ourselves. That's why God sent Jesus, and we believe in His death and resurrection. We can have His salvation and perfect righteousness as a free gift, and be acceptable in His sight, and including to live with Him in heaven and with the new born again need. Anyway, I hope you'll do that soon if you haven't already, because once it happens with the rapture and tribulation, there's no reset. There's no stop really with God's prophetic program, with that 7-year tribulation, second coming, millennial kingdom, eternity. It won't be too much longer in the rapture of being the church age, which we're in still, I believe, but it's not said exactly, other than probably the generation that saw Israel become a nation, 1948, as a fig tree, and Matthew 24 won't pass away till all these things, and it includes the things in the tribulation, second coming there, are fulfilled. And so, the people in 1948 are already quite old, but we have to add 7 more years for the tribulation anyway, and there'll still be some alive, according to that prophecy. Anyway, God bless, and hope, be interested to hear what you think of this video. Okay, and I think things will continue ratcheting up. Okay, bye for now.